Well, can we begin by asking, how and why did you get involved in cult-related issues, or?
Well, I was born. I'm a sociologist of religion, and I was studying science and religion, or rather scientists and religion, how different scientists would say that they could prove the Bible was true scientifically, or they could prove it was not true, or that they were sort of new age developing science, the kind of science that other people would call pseudoscience. The whole range from fundamental creationists to Marxists, bourgeois science ideas. And I got an invitation to go to a conference which was going to be attended by a whole lot of Nobel laureates. And so I was very flattered and accepted. And then my husband, who worked for the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, looked up the files for the funders and discovered that it was being funded by this Korean messiah who the Department of Public Prosecutions was looking into, correct connections with the Korean CIA, and he brainwashed his followers and everything, so he said, we better not go. So I said, nothing's going to stop me now. And that, of course, was the Unification Church and the Moonies. This was back in 1974. And before they were known as Moonies, some of us called them moonbeams because they were smiling the whole time, being very nice. Anyway, they then held some, is this okay?
Oh.
They then held some little round tables in their local headquarters on science and religion, to which they invited me. And so I got to know some of them a bit better. I discovered they drove us down to a farm they'd got, and the driver who I was sitting beside turned out to be a Cambridge graduate whose father was a professor at London University, which is where I was, whom I knew slightly. And so we got talking, and I was wondering why this intelligent, articulate son of this colleague of mine should have joined the church. And sometime after that I heard he'd come to visit me, and I thought, oh, he wants me to help him escape. But actually it turned out that he was worried because they were getting some bad publicity, and he wondered if I would like to go to a conference where he knew that a colleague of mine, another sociologist of religion, this is a bit long-winded, I don't know if it's what you want, but
No problem.
anyway, this colleague of mine was going to give a paper, and he'd only talked to former members, and this was going to be very negative. So I said, well, that's their fault because they didn't let anybody study them, and the colleague was a very good friend of mine and still is, and he would obviously be doing the best he could given the information that was accessible. So he said, well, we'll give you the accessibility. So I talked to my colleague, and we thought, well, this is a good opportunity. So it actually took 2 years to get access to the church on my conditions, which was I wanted a complete list of the membership so I could do a random sample of who I spoke to, rather than just speaking to who they wanted me to, and independent funding, which I got from what was then the Economic and Science Research Council. And then I started studying them, and I became more and more fascinated by the Moonies as they were then. I went and I lived with them for short periods, interviewed lots and lots, gave them long questionnaires, and then talked to former members, their parents, relatives, read the newspaper accounts, and sort of got more and more engrossed, and started comparing them with Hare Krishna, Scientology, other groups that came up and were all sort of the big cult scare at that time. And anyway, I wanted to do a general thing, but it ended up just addressing how they came to convert or be recruited, whether they were brainwashed or not. And I found that 90% of those who went through the so-called brainwashing process, a residential weekend, which I myself did several times, said, thanks very much, we don't want to be a Moonie. half of those who did join left of their own free will, so it seemed fairly clear that their brainwashing techniques weren't that effective. And that got me into a lot of trouble from some of the anti-cultists who were getting quite a lot of money through deprogramming, illegally kidnapping people. And I got attacked for this. And also my figures showing the large turnover. Unificationists didn't want that. Both sides were lying about the numbers because the unificationists didn't want people to know that people could join and yet find out that it wasn't doing everything it promised to do, whereas the anti-cultists were wanting to sort of say they're brainwashed, you can't get them out, it's not their fault, and it's not your fault if you're a loving parent, something's been done to them. So that was really how I got into it all, and I became one of them as far as the anti-cultists were concerned, which meant that I was a Mooney or I was being paid by them or something. And I was very willing to share all my information, but it was the time of the cult wars. There were scholars on one side and the anti-cultists on the other. And we accused them of never speaking to members or trying to find out and just generalizing and labeling. They accused us of either being cult lovers, sympathetic, being bought off and everything. And so the only time we ever met was in courts of law, arguing on the other side. And then one day it occurred to me, hey, we're generalizing about them. I've never gone and studied them. The British lot wouldn't let me near them, or some of them did, but in secret. They didn't want it to be known that they'd spoken to me. So the first time I came to Philadelphia was, and I think it was about 12 years ago, I'm not terribly sure. It was, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. I wrote to Herbert Rosedale, who was the president then, and said, can I come to your conference? And I got a charming letter back, to my surprise, saying, yes, you'll be very welcome, anybody can come. So I thought, oh dear, what are they going to do to me?
I was overjoyed. I was overjoyed.
Oh, you knew about this, did you?
Well, yeah, I was worked with Herbert till his death.
Ah, right. I didn't know anything about you. I'll interview you later. And anyway, I went, and as soon as I got into the hotel room, the phone went, and there was Herb saying, would you like to come up and meet the council, or whatever they were called? So I took a gulp and went up. I remember I liked my alcohol, but I didn't take any alcohol. I thought this was a big trap. What was going to happen? I either had water or ginger ale or something. And, I can't remember who was there. Carol was there, and Michael Mangoni, and they were all very nice. They were curious, as I was about them. But anyway, they were nice and welcomed me. And then in the conference itself, very mixed reception. One prominent anti-cultist who had actually appeared opposite in a law case. I walked into the lift in the morning, and that person was in the lift, and I said, good morning, and they actually turned their back on me. Another one actually spat at me. And others, some were sort of curious and would come up to me, but sort of not want to be seen to talk to me. Others made a point of being nice and welcoming me. But just as I thought they would all have horns and a forked tail, they obviously thought I had, and where was I keeping my hair's usually even worse mess than this, and perhaps the horns were underneath it. So then I said to Michael and Herb, why don't we meet together before the next, I think it was the next one conference in Seattle, for a day. And it'll be 4 of you and 4 of us, and we'll see, what our differences are and what the overlaps were. So each of us persuaded, I think Dave Clark was there with Herb and Michael, I can't remember who their other one was. And then I had, Jim Richardson and Burke Rochford, possibly Gordon Melton, I can't remember. But anyway, we spent the day, we had sandwiches brought in, and discussing things and saying what we didn't like and what we did. And we didn't agree on everything, but we understood each other a lot better. And I felt it was very healthy and very rewarding. And I think the biggest thing I learned, which funnily enough Lorna mentioned in her talk, which I thought was excellent, was that they were interested in the harm that destructive cults did, and we were interested in what new religious movements were like. And those were fundamentally different questions. There was overlap, but we had different interests. So it wasn't that we ignored the harm, it was just that was one part of it, and we included possibly what people call positive or the normal stuff. And we had to go in and watch this and talk to them to do this, whereas they were concerned with the harm, so they saw the people who were harmed. And a lot of harm was done, undoubtedly.
You are anthropologists, really.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm very much an anthropological sociologist.
Yeah.
But I've used statistics and things which anthropologists tend not to use.
Right.
And part of my study of the Unification Church was statistical. I had this big questionnaire, and I had a control group of people roughly similar backgrounds, asked the same questions, and did a lot of statistical analysis in order to sort of see how far one could generalize.
Tell me about Inform.
Inform I set up in 1988. This was the height of the deprogramming. They were deprogramming in Britain. It was considered okay to do this. It was shown on television. There was the head of FAIR, the chair of FAIR at that time was a member of the House of Lords, and he had his daughter deprogrammed. And I was seeing an awful lot of harm and suffering through what seemed to be ignorance and misinformation. And the misinformation was coming from the movements themselves, who obviously gave rose-tinted things and weren't sort of explaining about problems, and then the anti-cultists were just selecting the negative things. And the media, of course, wanted a good story. So everybody had their own agenda to produce something, and the pictures didn't fit. They were not contextualized. People would say what the Moonies were like in California in 1970 and assume they were the same in Britain, and they weren't. And I was looking at Eastern Europe. No, I wasn't, not in '88, but I was studying Western Europe, seeing there were great differences in the recruitment practices and everything, and the different movements. You couldn't generalize. You had to look at each movement at a particular time, and some movements did harm some people some of the time in some places, and didn't in others. And so it seemed to me it was important to get accurate, reliable, contextualized information out there. So I happened to know the Archbishop of Canterbury slightly, and I went to him with this idea. He knew the Home Secretary at the time, Douglas Hurd, and arranged for me to see the person who was in charge of cults at the Home Office. And with their support, I set up Inform with the idea that we would provide information which was as helpful as possible.
Who were your colleagues in Inform? In other words, who assisted you in its program?
Nobody.
Ah.
I mean, I did it myself, really. Well, I did it. There was somebody who was actually connected with FAIR, who the main anti-cult movement in Britain, and he used to come and heckle me, and I rather liked that, because if parents sort of were against me, I felt sorry for them, and I didn't want to answer back. But he was a very robust gentleman, and so I could be robust back, and so we both rather enjoyed this. So over time we became quite friendly, secretly of course. This happened with 3 different chairs of FAIR. I would meet them off limits, and I wasn't allowed to tell anyone because they were frightened about what they called the old biddies, who might get at them if they knew they were speaking to me. Well, anyway, this one, he's dead now, but he was a bit of a sort of maverick, and he set up a meeting for FAIR, which I attended, in which 4 former members were talking about their time in the movement, their respective movements, and there was all hell let loose because they refused to say that they'd been brainwashed, and they were accused of being brainwashed still and not telling the truth. Whereas they'd said, you know, we thought it was great at the time, and then we grew out of it and moved on. And we didn't like this, or we didn't like that, but you know, we knew what we were doing. So this head of fair and I went to a pub afterwards, and I said, you know, one thing that really was sort of road to Damascus for me, somebody tried to sort of pour oil on troubled waters and said, you know, well, perhaps you'd like to tell us something or the other. And a woman stood up and said, we don't want to hear this, we don't want to hear this. And I thought, you know, they really don't want to hear this. So discussing this in the pub afterwards, I said, really something ought to be done. So he said, well. So that was when I started to think and spoke to a few people. And I put together a sort of working group which consisted of him. By that time, Fair sort of found out that he was not being exactly what they wanted. A father of a unificationist, and he had tried to deprogram his son, and his son had run away, could run more quickly than the deprogrammers. And then he'd read my book on the Moonies and sort of came to me and said he'd changed his mind a bit. And he was a high-up civil servant. He was on the committee. I got representatives of the mainstream churches, the Catholics, the Church of England and the Free Churches, and the British Sociology and Religion Study Group to nominate members. And I can't remember who else there was now. But I had them as a sort of working party, and they eventually turned into governors. But I did all the sort of setting it all up. It took me a couple of years to set it up, and then we opened shop on the 1st of January
I remember
1988,
that.
and all hell was let loose.
Yes.
And it was pretty bruising, but I don't mind people attacking me if they're being honest and sort of saying what I have said or believe, but a lot of this was just talking rubbish about
Did they attack you through your boss, or through the government, or through the law?
Yeah, the lot. I mean, still,
I mean,
about 6 months
about you?
ago, somebody from Fair wrote to the Home Office complaining about me, saying things. I mean, the civil servants showed me the letter. I mean, it was sort of 1970 silliness. So most of it was either silly or untrue. They wrote to the director, Ralph Ravendorf, at the London School of Economics, where I was teaching, and said, you know, she's not safe to have with students. I used to take them on field trips. I never lost any. And he just used to forward the letters to me with a little note saying, here's some more data for you. And he was very supportive. On the whole, my colleagues were. Some were a bit suspicious. But generally speaking, the people whom I respected supported me. And I just had to sort of grin and bear it. I got upset when the BBC sort of put on programmes and edited it so that, you know, they were just wanting a big story, doing things which they knew were not true and had recorded as untrue. But that didn't happen a lot, but it did happen. I mean, it still goes on, but nothing like it was. It was pretty powerfully anti.
Any groups come after you? I remember I was with Jack Clark when he really got hammered by Scientology, for example.
Scientology threatened to sue me 3 times, but it never came to anything. More recently, the New Kadampa tradition has been sending letters to charity commissioners, LSE, complaining about us, saying we're not even-handed, that we're for the Dalai Lama. Because one of my researchers, who's meticulously fair, falls over backwards, to be fair. They accused her of, not being fair because we were listening to former members. On the whole, it was quite helpful when the media and the anti-cult movements were more strongly anti-cult, because even when they didn't like what we said, they said, well, at least you're fairer. They didn't like us including a whole lot of the stuff. But, we managed to build up some sort of relationships. I mean, even Scientology, they'd come along and look at our books, and they wanted us to take out certain books and say we shouldn't have them. And I remember John Attack's Piece of Blue Sky, or whatever it was called, they were insistent we should take that away. And we said, no, we'll put your books there as well, but that's not going, and you're not going to tell us what we do. And they thought that we were responsible for a report that was something to do with their advertising on some commercial broadcasting thing. We weren't actually. I knew who was. I wasn't going to tell them that, but I can't remember what the other thing was. Anyway, nothing came of it. Landmark Forum threatened to sue me because I didn't call them a new religious movement, and I included them in a book I wrote that was entitled New Religious Movements. That was bad enough for them. But nothing ever. We haven't been sued. The worst thing that happened, funnily enough, was when we were getting a rather nasty guru for rape, and we'd been working with the police on this, and they accused us of setting it all up. He was sent to prison for 10 years eventually, but the police wanted us to disclose the names of the people who had been telling us things. Now, we had persuaded some of the people who had told us to go to the police, which enabled them to take the case. And we told the police we knew these other things, but we weren't going to tell them who told us. And then we were, I think was it the Crown Prosecution Service or the police, I can't remember. But anyway, we were told that we had to disclose, which by law they could make us. And I decided that I'd rather go to prison than disclose confidential things, so I had to go to court. And that was rather scary. But the judge agreed with us that if we got the reputation of not preserving confidences, we wouldn't have got the information that allowed us to get this chap indicted anyway. And so the judge said that the police had to give us all our lawyers' fees, which was £20,000. They didn't give it all to us, but the Home Office actually topped up the difference to the nearest penny. Of course, that didn't cover the wear and tear and my grey hairs, but given evidence, several times gave evidence in that case, but we haven't actually had to go to court because of any of the... And the Scientology we have quite a good working relationship with now. We've facilitated getting money back from people and getting people off staff by talking and putting parents together with Scientologists and just being there. And we say, what about your ethics, beliefs and things? I think the first or the second time I came here, the Scientologists were, not to Philadelphia, but to AFF it was then, conference. There was a Scientologist demonstrating outside. Came up to me and said, whose side are you on? I said, I'm objective, value-free social scientist, which is my line. But no, we can work together with them quite well, and we've managed to put families together in my kitchen quite often. Mother has met her son for the first time for 14 years in my kitchen. Another case was actually 60 years. 80-year-old man from the Exclusive Brethren hadn't seen his family. I got them together in my kitchen.
Exclusive Brethren, is that the Plymouth Brethren?
Yeah.
Yeah, I met a lot of them in Africa.
Well, they they agreed. Eventually, it took 4 years, but they did, and they're still in touch, I gather. So, yeah, I think I don't feel ashamed of what Inform's done. We haven't done enough, but I don't think we've done much harm. We've angered a lot of people, but that doesn't worry me particularly.
Have you been involved specifically in any AFF/ICSA programs, as opposed simply to coming and speaking about your work?
No, I usually give a paper, but that's
Yes.
about all.
But you're not on a committee or things like that?
Oh, I think I'm on the editorial committee of something, but I never do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've once or twice been sent an article to review.
Have you? Oh,
No, that's it.
have you been involved in any way directly? What's the word? Educating your colleagues and peers about this general problem, or has it just been your work that stands for your communicating with them? In other words, have you gone to conferences and spoken about what you're doing in Britain, for example?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I spoke at AFF, I talked about Inform, or my approach, I think, which disrupted some people. I mean, there are still people here who think that I never talk to former members. And even with my first book, I was talking to former members, and I say that in the book. But, you know, they go on, this is the myth, and you can show them the page numbers, and they'll still say, she didn't do it, or she says such and such, and you can show. I mean, it's...
How about in Britain itself? I mean, there are professional associations, there are public...
No.
You've done that as well?
I've tried to talk to them. I invite them. At Inform, we put on seminars and conferences, and I've invited them. And some have come, but now they don't. I mean, people like Linda and Rod have come, and they're associated with FAIR, and they get a lot of their referrals from FAIR. But they're not sort of hardcore FAIR policy makers.
What about something like the British equivalent of the social science, various organizations, you know, the American Psychological Association?
Yeah, the BSA, yeah, they know what we do. Yeah, no, I give talks about that a lot, all over the world.
That was the question, yeah.
Well, I go practically every year to the police in Beijing and spend 2 weeks in police custody, giving lectures on methodology and the sort of work we do, and why Falun Gong is different in Britain from what it is in China, things like that. Which there was interesting discussion, you may have heard about this morning, when the Falun Gong people came to
I heard,
Chinese.
yes.
Yeah.
I did. I asked it, the Falun Gong is interesting. I once went to a lecture by Governor Weld of Massachusetts some years back. His wife was a China scholar from Harvard, and I asked her a question about Falun Gong, and she sort of, from the point of view of organizations that use undue influence, and she skirted the issue.
Yeah, it's a touchy issue.
Yeah.
It's but that was the reason I first I was giving some lectures at Gremlin University on methodology to people from young professors from all over the Republic, and there was this woman in the front row who was taking notes assiduously, and I said to my Gremlin colleague, oh, that student in the front row is obviously terribly interested. He said, that's the police. Oh gosh. Anyway, to cut a very long story short, she eventually persuaded me to go and talk to her students. But I did it on the understanding, because by that time, I mean, before the Falun Gong thing exploded, I'd been going to the YMCA and doing their exercises, because I'd heard about them, and I'd met several, and then after it exploded, I met several who'd been in prison and got them to talk at force services. So I knew quite a bit about Falun Gong. And so I said to her, well, I'll come, but I would like to meet some re-educated Falun Gong people and the people who are re-educating them, and some of the anti-Sejal, the evil heretical sect people in the government, the ministers and the secular non-governmental anti-government. So she said, right, and sure enough, I go and I've interviewed lots of them, and have visited, which is obviously a showpiece, where they deal with, this was down in Nanking. I say obviously a showpiece, but it was a very impressive place for sort of follow-up people who've been in Falun Gong. I mean, when I went in, there they were all doing Tai Chi, and I thought at first they were doing Falun Gong, but it was Tai Chi, and they were doing painting and making nice dumplings and having group therapy and stuff. And it wasn't closed, they were going in and out. And I've interviewed a lot of people who now do that, so.
Has in your career thus far had been influenced in any way, intellectually or even practically, by AFF and ICSA?
Oh yes, yeah.
Would you say a few words about that?
Well, I think I knew intellectually about the harm long before I came here. But I think they've shown me the variety of harm that can be done. They've sensitized me to, although I still don't like the metaphor of brainwashing because it implies that, you know, something is just done and there's no give and take, which I think doesn't show the subtlety and way in which people can, or what Alan Schecter calls undue influence. I think that's the important word. And there is undoubtedly undue influence. And that's helped me see that in places, sort of sensitized me, I think, in a lot of ways. It's helped me work out more what I agree and disagree with among the people I see here, and perhaps be more tolerant of the people I think are wrong. Understanding. I remember once I went to, normally I'm not allowed in them because I'm not an ex-member, but on one occasion, I think it was in Spain, Pat and Joe let me join them in the group, and one of the ex-members said how helpful it was when she came out to be able to use the word cult, because that sort of explained. And I thought, yes, you know, I'm going to stop saying don't use the word cult, full stop. I think using it just as a generalizing label is harmful if you go on doing that, but I think I can really see how it's helpful to somebody coming out. I mean, that's just one example, but I get little sort of eurekas or insights the whole time, listening to people, seeing what can upset people, which perhaps wouldn't upset me, and it has definitely sensitized me.
Knowing what you do about ICSA, are there any things you think that not doing well or correctly, and do you see any need for development in any areas from the way things are now?
Not big things. I admire Michael and the way he balances people, the different constituents, and his patience. I mean, he's got a pretty good team working, and he puts up with people who I would just want to kick where it hurt most. And sometimes I get irritated at him because he's being so nice. And but I think he is responsible for the way this coheres and sticks. It goes up and down. I think it's a shame more people don't talk to active cult members, but that might be asking a bit too much. I think the fact that Anutama comes, you know, he and I were the sort of pariahs for ages. So I got to know him quite well, and you know, we were the only people who dared eat with each other, you know, at points, and it's been sometimes difficult. I mean, for him, he had a difficult time this time, but he stuck through it. And I think it's a pity there aren't more. There have been some unificationists, I don't think there are this time, who've come. But it's difficult for them. But then that might change what ICSA does do so well. So perhaps it's just as well there are only a few. I mean, I think Knutson was more than just a token. I think he has contributed that not all cult people are necessarily wicked. And I don't know, were you at Noel's memorial?
No, unfortunately I was out of town.
Anutama told a lovely story about, have you heard this? That
no, I haven't yet.
At the very end, people were giving memories of Noel, and Anutama said that fairly early on, he'd been there about 6 times or something, and you know, and he was the only person at registration, and he was wearing his Hare Krishna robes and everything, and somebody came up and said, no, you've got to come away, and Noel said, I can't, I'm on registry. No, you've got to come now. So Noel said to Anutama, would you mind taking over? So there was Anutama in his robes taking registration from these people coming up. And I thought that was a lovely story, and I wish there were more Noels who could have had that trust and farsightedness.
Wonderful.
I mean, it was funny, but incredibly moving.
Well, I must thank you so much. I've enjoyed this immensely and learned a lot. I guess I have to ask you, though, is there anything more you'd like to say? This is aimed at, as I said, people who may be new to the organization in the future and may even be potential board members, and to help them learn about the organization and its ethos before they jump in.
Well, I think the ethos that Lorna gave in her keynote yesterday or the day before was what I really admired. In fact, I went up to her afterwards and said I was really disappointed because there was absolutely nothing I disagreed with. I thought it was really good, and if that's the direction and the attitude of ICSA, all strength to it.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and I'll let you go.
Thanks.